Thank you. Welcome to the Boulevard. My name is Aaron. I want to tell you a little bit about myself, but I realized something as I was getting ready that as a student, I get a chance to preach in a lot of different places, and so often my sermon is like, let me tell you about who I am. And so I just end up preaching the same thing over and over. And I realize that I come to say often, I'll say like, I would like to share a little bit about myself. And then I realized like, the very act of preaching is sharing myself with you. So I'm going to let that do more of the talking about who I am. But I am a person. I'm a creation of God. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a student. I'm a pastor. I'm all of these different things all put together. And I'm a being who prays. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the last aspect of that first verse that says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, the breaking of bread, and the prayers. And part of me thinks Ben gave me this one because he didn't want to deal with the confusing nature of what prayer is. So he was like, we'll just let Aaron handle that one. But that's my goal. And so this morning I'd like to do two things. First thing I'd like to do is I would like us to learn a little bit about prayer. It's something that is broadly complex, it's huge, and it's, for a lot of us, really confusing to even know how to pray or what to do. And then there's that dreaded moment if you're standing in a group and someone's like, someone want to pray? And it goes silent. Everyone's like, not me, you know? So, I mean, what is this thing that we're doing? And so I want to talk about that. And then the second thing that I want to do is I would actually like to pray. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about things. And I can stand up here and I can talk about prayer and I can give you history lessons on how the church has understood prayer. And if we never do it, it means nothing. So I would like to pray. I'd like to spend time together praying. But first I'd like to tell a story. So part of me, and if you ask my family, an obsessive part of me is that I like to cycle. I like biking a lot. Like too much, actually. But I want to tell a story about when I first began. So I was probably 4 or 5, somewhere right in that realm, and I had this bike, and it had training wheels on it, right? And one day my dad decided that this was the day that I was going to learn how to ride a two-wheel bike. And so he went and he took the training wheels off my bike, and he turned and put them back in the garage, and he turned around and I just grabbed the bike and took off riding. And he was like, what is going on? Like he thought he was going to have to teach me how to ride a two-wheel bike, and I just took off. What he didn't know is that for the weeks leading up to this, I had been leaning really hard on them, so I bent the training wheels up. So I had been riding a two-wheel bike for the last couple of weeks. He had no idea. I'd like to think that it's just this extraordinary talent that has led me to what I do now. But I recently discovered something that has made me rethink the way that story works. And so like I said, I'm a father. I have 2 kids. And our youngest right now is learning how to ride a two-wheeled bike. And so a few weeks ago, I took her training wheels off, and with her having my DNA, I expected her to just take right off, and she didn't. In fact, she wouldn't get on the bike. And she cried and she yelled at me and she wanted the training wheels back on her bike. There's a pain in that, right? There's a fear of the training wheels coming off, because what if she falls over? What if it hurts when she falls over? See, now here's the thing. She has a bike that doesn't have any pedals on it. It's one of these balance bikes, so she can sit on it, she can kind of scoot around. She rides that thing everywhere. She is perfectly capable of balancing a bike. But as soon as I take the training wheels off, now there's a sense of fear of like, do I actually know how to do this? And so in Acts chapter 2, the people of the early church, they devote themselves to the prayers. So I want to talk a little bit more about prayer, because I think sometimes prayer can feel like the training wheels came off, and what if we fall down? And what if it hurts? So in order to do that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what prayer has been in the church. If you do a simple search of scriptures, so one thing that's really fun that I enjoy about being a student is that people assume that I just like memorize the Bible, that that's what I do, and so like they'll be like, "Oh, what about prayer in the Bible?" I'll give you a little peek behind the curtain. I just did a search of the word prayer in the Bible. Like, I don't know this, but there are these incredible tools that technology has allowed us to be able to search these things. And so when I search the word prayer in the Bible, 322 different instances come up. There's prayer everywhere in the scriptures, from Genesis to Revelation, all the way through the scriptures. There is prayer in the scriptures. This is not something that's new. It's something that from the beginning of human history, we've talked about prayer. And then in church history, prayer has been a big part of it. There are a number of different things to look at, but one of the things that's been really interesting to me is that the church actually has hours of prayer. It has a schedule of prayer for every day, and it has for a long time. In fact, there are different people that say different amounts of times, like different things, but a lot of times 9 times a day. There's a scheduled time of prayer. One of the things that I enjoyed about my undergraduate study is that we were near to a monastery, and we had a pretty good relationship with the monks there. And so for a bunch of my classes and a bunch of just different opportunities, we would go to the monastery and we would spend time with the monks. And their entire lives revolve around the hours of prayer. Everything they do is determined by these hours of prayer. When they wake up, when they eat, when the midday comes, when they're going to go to bed, and then even in the middle of the night. Everything they do revolves around prayer, and they've been doing this for a long time, and people before them have been doing this. So the church has prayed for a really long time. So the Catholic Church tends to keep these hours of prayer a little more diligently than we do. In the Reformation, some of those hours of prayer got a little bit more lost, and then in America it happened a little bit more where our work schedules often don't revolve around prayer. But there's still prayer. It's never left. It's not like now we don't do it anymore. Prayer is still something that we do as a faith because we believe that prayer is a time where we are communicating with God. And even more importantly, we believe that prayer is a time when God is communicating with us. And so I want to talk about a few different types of prayer. There are three types of prayer that I would like to talk about today. And this is the part that's very educational, very student-like. You can tell that I'm a grad student when I do this part because it's just very informational. But there are 3 different things that I'd like to look at. So the first thing is a term called Lectio Divina. So this is a Latin word. And this basically is reading scripture in prayer. So there's a passage, and we read this passage with a purpose. And that purpose is that it's prayer. And so when we read from this passage, there's a question that we need to ask ourselves in this method of prayer. That question is, what is the Spirit saying to us? And that doesn't mean me. That means us. What is the Spirit saying to us right here, right now? And then once we do that, we read the passage again. And then probably again. And then again. And as we do that, more and more these words begin to pop out to us, and these images begin to pop out to us, and we start opening our mind toward listening to what the Spirit is saying to us in that moment. And so, for an example, we have this beautiful passage. So here's a prescribed passage. We've been memorizing it, right? But we're not just memorizing it for words. We're memorizing it because the more that we spend time in this, the more it has a transformative power in our lives. And so I'm going to read this passage, and I would like us to ask this question. What is the Spirit saying to us? So when I read this, I want you to listen for a word, a phrase, an image, a picture, something that pops into your mind, something that just might be the Spirit telling you something. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all, as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone, because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together, and they had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all, as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. I can tell you that when you're doing a practice like that from up here, it's really hard to hear what the Spirit's saying. You're very focused on doing this part right. Times of silence feel like silence. In fact, you're counting a few seconds to see how long before it gets really uncomfortable. There's a lot of distractions that are going on in our mind. But the best part of this is that maybe on day 30, maybe on day 200, those distractions can melt away because you've come back to this verse over and over and over. And then maybe a phrase will stick out. I can tell you that recently I was reading through this with a group, and Ben was with us, and he talked about that very last phrase. He said, day by day, the Lord added to their number. And it was amazing because when we did it as a group, he was able to hear something from the Spirit that I wasn't. And so when I was not able to hear something, he was able to hear something that was shared with the rest of us. And suddenly now the Spirit was able to say something to us, not just to Ben, not just to me. The Spirit was talking to all of us, and we realized that in this moment, we have this image where maybe the church just multiplied and was there. This verse tells us something a little different, doesn't it? It says every day they were back at it, and that God was adding to their number every day. But that means that there was some sort of consistency there, right? It wasn't like they just had an explosive moment and then just stayed there. No, every day they had to come back at it. Not every Sunday, every day, they came back at it. And so this is this practice of coming back to the scripture and reading it as prayer. Not memorizing it for the words, not memorizing it for some sort of badge or honor because we've done something, but reading it and memorizing it because it is something that is speaking to us. And there's another form of prayer that I'd like to look at now. This form of prayer is called the examen. There's a famous saint, his name's Saint Ignatius, and the examen is a process that's prescribed to him. So I'd like us to try something here. In this process, every day, we take a moment. So if you could all close your eyes with me a minute, because that's going to make us feel a little bit more comfortable. In our first move, we take a moment to become aware of God's presence. We're not inviting him in. He's already here. In this move, we move ourselves to become aware of the presence of God. Next, we look at our own day. We've only been awake for a few hours, but things have already happened. We've gotten ready for church. We've traveled to church. We've interacted with different people. Look at those things. Work your way through them. Remember the different things that you've done today. And realize that those things are a gift. The reality is that some people didn't wake up today. And so we review our day with a sense of gratitude. And now we pay attention to the emotions that those things bring out. Has today been happy? Has today been sad? Is there joy? Is there pain? What things have we felt? Once again, our feelings are a gift from God. Our emotions are a gift from God. As you've been reviewing the events of your morning, is there one thing? Is there something that's coming back up over and over? Remember that God is in that one thing. Remember that God was there before it, God was there during it, God is there after it. Choose this thing to partner with God in. And then we look forward to the rest of our day, to tomorrow, remembering that everything that's come up till now is a gift from God, and everything that's coming is a gift from God. And God is there with us and will be there with us. And so we can enter into tomorrow with a new sense of hope. And as we open our eyes, we remember that all of this recognizes that we when we examine ourselves, when we examine the emotions we're feeling, when we examine the way that our lives have interacted, it's a way of recognizing that God is working within us. Then there's a third type of prayer. This prayer is my personal favorite. It's something that has become transformative in my life. This prayer is called centering prayer. And so, again, we're going to sit together. There's a particular verse that has become really amazing. It's transformed the way that I completely think about this. And so I'd like to read this verse, and it's gonna take a progression. And while I'm doing this, I'd like you to pay attention to the way that you're breathing. I don't want you to change it, just be aware of it. This verse says, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still and know. Be still. Be. As I read through that verse, I've always heard it as a whole piece. I've always been told to memorize it as, "Be still and know that I am God." And then as I hear it distilled down, and I realize that the very first word of that is be. It's a hard thing to do. That's what this prayer focuses on, is being. And so centering prayer uses a word or a phrase or something like that. Be. Some people use love, peace, Jesus. And it's this one word. And as we spend time, new thoughts will come into our brain. I'm thinking about the clock. I'm thinking about the sound of the fans. I'm thinking about, have I lost half of you yet? This prayer brings us back to that word in those moments. When those thoughts come in, we greet them. But we greet them like we're passing somebody on the street. We greet them and we let them go, and we remember this one word. The reason I asked you to pay attention to your breath is that there's actually a beautiful ancient Jewish teaching about the name of God. So it's fitting that earlier we sang a song where we said, "It's your breath in our lungs." See, in this Jewish teaching, they were trying to figure out what is the name of God, right? Now, in Scripture, there is a written name of God that God gives, but it actually can't fully be written in its original language. And there's a reason for that. It's because to write the name of God is to place God within this thing, and the Jewish people believe that God is so much bigger than that. So the word that they have to represent God is Yahweh. A lot of us have heard that word, but to look more at what that word actually is, it's actually breath. So the Jewish belief is that the first syllable of that, Yah, when it's said, sounds like that, but it actually is more like, that's more what it's like. And the last syllable is more like, and so when we pay attention to our breath, the Jewish people believe that we are saying the name of God with every breath. And so in this prayer, we pay attention to that. We pay attention to the fact that every single breath is a prayer to God. This prayer centers around listening. And I think that's the reason it's been so transformative for me, is that often prayer doesn't feel like listening in our world. Often prayer feels more like a menu order. I do it all the time when I'm in a moment of stress or in a moment of panic, where my prayer is more a request than anything else. But then when I'm comfortable, I'm not even sure I make time for prayer. But this practice brings us back and remembers that when I'm comfortable, I'm still breathing. When I'm stressed out, I'm probably breathing faster, but maybe that's actually a longing prayer for God. That's one of the things that's become really interesting to me. As I bike more and more, and I do physical activity, breath is really important. Almost any athlete will tell you that breath is probably the key to endurance races. Breath is the key to swimming, it's the key to running, it's the key to biking, it's the key to anything that requires endurance. If you can control your breathing, you can endure a lot of things. I wonder if that's not an accident. So when I'm riding and I hit mile 30, mile 40, and I feel like I don't have any more breath in my lungs, it's a moment where prayer becomes what I'm doing. Because every breath is an ask for another breath. And so when things are calm and quiet and I'm not in the stress of this world, my breathing is slow. And I can remember that God is there in that. But when the stress of every day comes on and I'm not even aware of the fact that I'm breathing, it's in those moments where just becoming aware of it can help me remember that God's there too. And so I have to ask this question now. How many of you felt like that was just completely a fire hydrant all at once? And we're not sure which one's which. It didn't really clear up what prayer is. See, that's part of the issue. As I was writing the sermon, I realized that even just talking about prayer is confusing. And it brought me back once again to my daughter trying to ride a bike. I take the training wheels off and she doesn't know what she's doing anymore. And so there's this fear, is it even worth riding a two-wheel bike for her? Is it worth it, or is it better to just stay with what I know, what I'm comfortable with, and not try it all? See, the thing is recently I was trying to help her figure this out, and I was kind of holding the seat, and I was showing her, look, you know how to balance. You've done this before, it's not that hard. And she said this thing to me that was really interesting. She said, I'll never be able to ride like you. And I was like, And then I realized that, she's the youngest. Everyone around her is already riding a two-wheeled bike. Well. And so she has this disconnect of, I can't do that. That's something that the really talented people can do. And so in that moment, I have to tell her, no, I believe in you. You can do this. But there's a reality. She's going to fall. A lot. But the fact that we're going to fall should never stop us from trying to do it. And I think the exact same thing is true about prayer. Even me, who is a student of the Bible, is getting I'm mastering divinity right now. That's what I'm doing in school. And every day I think, there's no way I can do that. Every day I look at people who pray so much better than I do. And I think, I feel like I'm dealing with training wheels. And I'm terrified if they come off. It's really interesting. There's a particular person that I look to when I want to learn about prayer. His name is Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan friar, which basically means he's a lot more spiritual than I am. And so when I need to know more about prayer, I like to read things that he talks about because he's very good at just saying bluntly and well things about prayer. As I was listening to him talk about prayer, he said, when we spend time in contemplation and prayer, it's the darkest things that come up first. I thought, it's a lot more true than I could ever think. When I sit quietly, when we sat quietly, how many of our thoughts turn to nervousness, self-consciousness, the pains that we're feeling? It's those darkest things that come up first. Those are the things that come to our mind. And he talks about how if you actually want to experience the fullness of prayer, don't run away from those things. He said we have to actually sit with those things in order to feel the freeing power of prayer. But that hurts. And I think that's what makes prayer practices so difficult, is that most of us start this new practice, or we decide, like, I'm going to pray every morning, and then we get to morning 3, and all it has been is pain. And it gets really hard to go to morning 4, and morning 5, and morning 6, because it's just pain, and pain, and pain. And we have to keep in those things. I would like to say that there's this easy thing where if you do it for 30 days, you'll be fine, and then it'll be all good. But I've known a lot of people who have prayed for longer than 30 days, and they don't say that it's fine. So there are some things that I think will be really helpful for us. I was talking actually in the back before this with some people about technology. I got a new phone yesterday. There's a lot of things that I need to transfer over, and I need to figure out this, and I don't know the Wi-Fi password for here, so it's been a mess. But we were talking about technology and how reliant we are on it. You know, even just the clock of knowing what my timing is requires technology. Thankfully, I have a clock in the back. I don't have to pull out my phone and keep checking what time it is. But we realized something, that in prayer, our phones can get in the way. But there's also this really cool thing that I've come to discover, that the phone can work like training wheels. So there's a couple of things that I've realized, that there are apps for prayer. It's amazing what we've been able to develop. The 3 prayers that we did, there are apps designed around those that will walk you through every single piece of them. But here's the thing that I've recognized about that, is that those are training wheels. Those are designed to get us up on the bike and get us learning how to ride. At a certain point, those training wheels will come off, and we're going to have to decide if it's worth falling. If that's something that you feel like, boy, I don't even know what those training wheels are, I don't even know what any of that is, I would love to be able to walk through some of that with you. Because here's the thing that I've recognized the most that's true about riding a bike and about praying, is that it's better if you don't teach yourself. It's better if you do this with people. If there are people who are able to do that thing with you, who are able to help you learn how to balance, But see, the really cool thing is that even if I'm doing that, it's because I'm going to people who are better at it than I am. Even when I feel like I'm doing it the greatest, there are people that I can learn from. And so prayer is not something that we do completely by ourselves. Even though it feels like it, we're not. Like I said, in Scripture, there's a lot about prayer. There's a really interesting verse in Revelation that talks about how the angels in heaven are lifting up the prayers to the throne of God. So even in that moment, if we're completely alone here, even in that moment, I don't believe we're praying alone. And so as we're learning how to pray, as we're devoting ourselves to the prayers, that shouldn't be done alone. That should be done with people. As we begin to take those training wheels off, as we begin to pedal more and more, as we begin to learn how to balance, how to navigate our way through the world, there's some interesting things that have come to mind, because even in those moments, I still get the feeling that prayer is a lot bigger than what I want to make it. And so, as I was thinking about this, as I was researching this, I was thinking, I still feel like there's something missing. I still feel like prayer is this, it's this task that I have to accomplish. It's this thing that I have to devote myself to, but I still am not sure what I'm devoting myself to. And then a friend of mine sent me a quote from a book that he was reading, and it just absolutely opened up my mind on this. This quote that he sent me, he said, "Prayer is not doing, but being. It's not words, but the beyond words experience of coming into the presence of something much greater than myself. It's an invitation to recognize holiness and utter these simple words, holy, 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 in response." Then this line really hit me. It said, "I sometimes think of prayer as a certain quality of attention that comes upon me when I'm busy doing something else." That was the thing that ended up transforming all of this, because prayer is always. And so this morning, as we're singing, and I recognize that this is prayer. We're worshiping God. This part's prayer. And then this morning, I'm sitting in the quiet because my kids are with my in-laws overnight, and it's actually quiet for once. And I recognize that God is here. This is a moment of prayer. And so prayer is everywhere. Prayer is everything that I'm doing, even when I don't want it to be. And once again, I turn back to Richard Rohr, who talks about how we should pray in church. In fact, he says it interestingly. He says, you can pray in church too. And he says, but it doesn't stop when you leave church. Which is hard for me, because in the busyness of my life, I think oftentimes it stops when I leave church. But that's the cool thing about our prayer, is that it's daily. It's hourly. It's every second. And our prayers can be purposeful. They can be designed to listen for God. They can be designed to talk with God. They can be crying out to God, but they can also not be purposeful. Because God is here, God is listening, God is interacting with us. And so oftentimes our prayers are more about us recognizing God than God recognizing us. And so we're going to move to the table, but remember how I said the second thing I wanted to do was pray? We're going to do that differently. I think the image in my mind initially is that we're going to spend time and we're going to come down and we're going to pray and we're going to say words together. What I've come to recognize is that the very act of communion is prayer as well. When we are together, when we are doing this, communion is this sign and this seal of what God has done for us, but it is also our moment of prayer. And so that's why we believe that prayer is a part of all of this. Prayer is something that we're doing together, and so that's why we have people who are here to pray with you, because doing this is prayer, and sometimes we need to do prayer together, because we're recognizing that all of this is part of it. And so even in this moment when Jesus was betrayed, he was with his disciples, which means he was together. He was with other people, and he took this bread and he broke it, and he said, "This is my body, which was broken for you." And then later, he took a cup and he poured it out. He said, "This is my blood, which is a new covenant for you." He said, "Every time you do this, remember me." Or in other words, every time you do this is prayer. Every time you do this, you're listening for me. You're talking with me. And so as we take communion, this is our act of prayer together. And so as the band leads us through song, we can listen, we can sing together. We can become aware of God's presence while we're doing something else. And so I'll invite the servers up.